Manhattan. This is the new edition of a game that originally came out in the 1990s. It has upgraded and much prettier components now, and after talking to a friend that owns and played the original game, I can say the gameplay is pretty much the same. It's just new components that look much better. Now, Manhattan is a fairly abstract game, Eurogame-ish. The idea is to build in skyscrapers in different districts of a city or different cities, but again, it feels really pretty abstract. Each player will have a hand of cards such as this one, each card indicating a grid of 9 spots and a specific spot within that grid. Each player has a card such as this one, and each player sits on a different side of the board. This is important because the value of a card, or I should say the spot that a card indicates, depends on the orientation of the card. When you play a card, it has to sort of like stand up, stand on its shorter edge, or I should say as being the same orientation as your personal card. So when I'm sitting on this side of the table, this card here indicates the top middle position of any grid on the board. And this one here will indicate this position here, but if I'm sitting on that side of the table, that indicates this position here. So this is important. So each player has a hand of cards. As we say, each player has a card such as this one, which is used to organize your game pieces. Each player also has a pool of pieces that represent different sections of buildings of different heights. This is a 1 level or 1 story section. This is a 4-story section, as you can see here from the up-close view, and then we had the 2-story and a 3-story. And a 3-story. These are the 3 types. The game is played in 4 rounds. Each round is divided in 6 turns. At the beginning of each round, you select 6 pieces that you place on your card. Suppose that these are the 6 pieces that I want to play in the upcoming round. So you will play a round in which you play all of those 6 pieces. Each player places the 6 pieces they selected, then each player selects 6 more pieces, and you continue like this, selecting, placing for 4 times until all pieces have been placed on the board. Super simple. During your turn, you play a card, place a piece on the board, and draw a new card from the deck. When you place a piece on the board, you place it on any of the 6 available grids in the position indicated there. Say I'm playing this card here, and then I'm placing that piece there. Then that player is playing that card there, and they could place it here, 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 and say they decide to place a piece there. Then the game goes around and I decide to play this card here, and I place this piece here, but I could also place it here, here, or any from my position, bottom right corner on any of the grids. There is an important rule. You can place pieces on top of your own one. Easy if indeed a certain tower was made of only pieces that belong to you, so you're just adding to your tower to make it stronger. However, it is also possible to add to towers that have been started by the players, and sometimes even by multiple players, as long as by adding to an existing tower or an existing skyscraper, now you have the majority. That is, you have more story than the player that previously had the most story. You have more than the player or the same. Say, basically, if there is a building, one player placed a 2-level building, another player could still place on it by placing a 2-story building or more. So here this player is placing a 3. Alright, now this player I made a legal placement. Suppose actually, to make it more intriguing, we had this building here, was only 1 level. Then this is the player is placing 2. 2 is more than 1, so that is legal. Then the player is placing a 3. 3 is more than 1. Now, if blue wants to place a piece there, since there is a 3 here, blue needs to place a 3 or a 4. If yellow wants to add 2, it is possible for yellow to add simply a 2, not necessarily a 3 level. I'm looking for a 2. Because 2 plus 1 that is already there is 3, matches that. And now if anybody wants to add that, again, now 3 is still the maximum, 3 and 3. So basically you have to match or exceed the number of stories that are in a building that have been added by another player, and the player that has the most up to that point. So buildings can be pretty high and have a lot of different configurations. If a building already has 5 by a single player and no one else has anything there, then no one can add to it because, well, there is nothing of mine that I can add to. I can only add up to 4, so I cannot match 5 or more. And so that's a way, by the way, to grab a building early on. You place a 4, and then before anybody can add to it, you place another one before anybody can do anything, and that is how you acquire control early on. But of course it can also be good to have control of different buildings, or a lot of buildings, instead of like just a single building then no one can take from you. Now, so as the game progresses, there will be different configurations of buildings in the 6 cities or districts. After each player has placed all of the buildings that are on the card, we have a round of scoring, and then we play the second round, then we score again, and so on and so forth. During the round of scoring, the player that controls the single highest building on the board scores 3 points. And controlling means to be on top, of a building. In this case, the single highest building is controlled by purple, because that is the building and purple is on top. So single highest building scores 3 points. Then for each neighborhood in which you have most buildings, you score 2 points. In this case, yellow scores 2 points there because they have 3 yellow buildings versus a single one by another player. Then you score a point for each building that you have in the game, regardless of where they are and regardless of how tall they are. That's how you score points. You continue this 4 times, and after the fourth scoring, at the end of the 4th round, the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. Manhattan. So as I said, the main change from the previous edition is in the components. The production values are very high here. The game really looks pretty, both when you're looking at the individual components, the cards, the board, and of course when you're looking at the board during gameplay and at the end of the game. These towers with different colors, they just form a really nice composition almost on the board. There are at least 2 aspects of the components though, in which the fact that we have prettier components does not necessarily translate into components that are fully functional. There are aspects of gameplay that seem to be slightly affected by the way the components look, although the components still look good. One is these translucent blocks that represent different sections of the buildings. They look amazing when they are stacked on the board, but they're not always all that easy to tell apart, meaning you cannot always tell at a glance if a certain block is 2 stories or 3 stories. 1 and 4 are easier to tell apart. Those, well, not so much. You have to look very closely. With the blocks of the lighter colors, that is easier to tell because you can see the grid of the windows. Darker colors, such as purple, not so much. And you just have to look twice and count a little bit more than maybe you would if the blocks were opaque like they were in the previous edition and you were able to tell at a glance that is 2 stories, that is 3 stories. They will look less pretty, but it would be a little more functional in terms of gameplay. Another thing that was more functional in the original edition is the cards. Again, I don't have the original edition, a friend of mine owns it and showed it to me. The cards in the original edition have the grids where you can place the blocks reproduced twice on each card, one in the top left corner and one in the top right corner. Less beautiful because it's the same image twice, rather than here you have a nice illustration at the bottom, one large grid on top. And yet, with that design of the cards, you could have the cards in your hand of cards in a fan, and still be able to see exactly where each card will allow you to add a block, because you would see the grid peeking from the fan of cards, no matter the direction in which you're fanning it. Here, since you only have the grid once on top of the card, as you have the cards in a fan in your hand, you may not necessarily see where a certain grid points to, simply because a card in the fan is covering the other one partially, and is covering the relevant information. So, which is one of the reasons why when you're playing cards, say pokers, then you have, of course, a reminder of what the card does in the two corners on top of the card, not just at the center of the card. Minor complaints, minor quibbles, but these are things that make the game look nice, even nicer than before, but they're not as effective in terms of gameplay. Gameplay proper. It is vastly affected by the number of players. This is a game that is ideal for 4 players. It is what it's meant to be. Then you have a lot of interaction on the board. You have different actors, different agents that are putting a lot of blocks, a lot of information, and you have a fight which is somewhat, say, even. Everybody against everybody else. Two players, you use 8 blocks, 8 sections per turn, or should say per round. And so it can get really tug of war. Hey, you wouldn't mind, I'm gonna put it back on yours, and then we're gonna do that at each other, and we're gonna have this enormous pile, or maybe we're fighting in 1 or 2 grids and completely ignoring the other 2. With 3 players, it can work. It can definitely work as long as players are aware of what the risks are, and the risk, of course, is the 3-player dilemma. That is, if 2 players start playing as if they were playing with only 2 players, it gets me against you. Oh, you did that to me, now I'm gonna do that to you, and basically they exact revenge over one another all the time. Then the 3rd player that keeps a low profile and looks inconspicuous is probably going to win. So 3 players is fine as long as the players don't take things personally. They remember that it's only business, and actually in that case you can have 2 players ganging up against whoever is on top, and that evens things as the game progresses. As soon as somebody emerges as ahead, and then the 2 players bash him or her, then somebody else emerges, bash back. And so actually that may work, but again, not with every player, not in every chemistry in a 3-player group. 4 players ideal, 3 players still good. As for gameplay, it is fun. Gameplay is really good in its simplicity, in its linearity. So terse, so minimalistic, and yet so effective, because you have so many different strategies that you can use to approach the dilemmas on the board. You can try to score for the highest building, which is very nice, but of course if you spend too much blocks on that one, that gives you maybe 3 points if you manage to control it, 1 point, but any building is worth 1 point. Even just a single building that you have with a single story neglected in a corner, that is still good. Again, the tallest building in the game is not gonna do any more than a single building for a majority. So you can concentrate, and concentrating has its advantages, one of which being that I'm not just getting a new building, I'm taking one away from you, so the net advantage is bigger than if I'm starting a new building. But again, the problem is that you're concentrating a lot if you keep taking buildings from other people. If you go high, you're concentrating a lot, and then there aren't many areas in which you have a presence. There aren't many skyscrapers that you have. So the balance there between concentrating and working on high buildings and taking buildings from other people, and on the other hand, spreading out as much as possible using those weak 1-story sections that anybody can take from you. But what if they don't? So you start spreading those around in different areas, and maybe you won't score majority in many places, but if you have multiple players, they will not go against you. Like, hey, I have majority because I have three buildings here, very tall, and you only have two of those little pointless ones. In another area, another player has majority, not the same one, and you again are second with a bunch of buildings. So actually, by spreading out systematically, you may be able not to win anywhere or almost anywhere for majority, but then in the aggregate you have this like colony, this epidemics of buildings that will still score you points. So I like the fact that there are several paths to victory, and there is a balance that you have to try to achieve again between concentration and expansion. And I like the fact that, like in any game that has to do with majority, that that gameplay is so interactive. It's not about having a ton of pieces, it's about having more pieces than the opponent. It's about having one piece more than an opponent on a certain building to be able to score the building, to take control. Actually here, even to have the same number of stories in a building, as long as you get there a little later. Or again, in a certain district, to have majority there, again, it's just about having one more than the opponent. You have one and no one else has anything there, that is the majority. It just scores as many points as if I have 5 buildings and you have 4. So really nice, this constant interaction. But again, precisely because of that, players have to remember to take things not personally, just go for gameplay, not to try to retaliate against one another, because then it becomes tug of war. Less interesting, also less effective in terms of gameplay. There's also a quite considerable luck element. A little surprising, because this is an abstract game, and you're thinking, chess and checkers is a Euro game, at least in the theme, but there is more randomness here than you have in your average Euro game. But it's something that you have to deal with. Everybody has to deal with it equally. There isn't really much that you can do to mitigate that. But what you can do, the flexibility, is in the fact that a certain card tells me that I can place a cube in the top right corner. And that's where that card gets me stuck with, but then I have 6 districts in which that may happen. And there may be a place in which that is occupied by a building, that such a configuration that is impossible for me to add to. Then I have 5 options, maybe 4 options. Still, those cards, thanks to the fact that they can be applied to different districts, they give me enough flexibility there that I feel that the randomness is definitely there, but presents me challenges rather than simply getting me stuck with configurations that will determine my unavoidable loss only based on luck. They present me with interesting puzzles, but I don't feel that they do me or they hand me victory easily. In general, Manhattan, a really fun game. I definitely enjoyed it. There are a couple of minuses and caveats here and there, as I mentioned in my conclusions, but if I had to tally the pluses and the minuses, I think that the pluses vastly outweighed the minuses. Overall, a very good game. Very simple, and so also the advantage is that you can play it with players that maybe don't play games very often, or not particularly fond of learning long systems of rules. But then, around such a lean core of rules, you have gameplay which is nuanced and definitely captivating and engaging. Manhattan, a pretty good game.